Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Hannah Vaughan Jones, CNN International, and Nick Clegg, Vice President of Global Affairs, Facebook.
Well, hello, everyone. So my name's Hannah Vaughan Jones. I'm a British journalist, and I'm really delighted to be here today on behalf of Concordia to speak to Sir Nick Clegg, who is Facebook's Vice President of Global Affairs and also, of course, Deputy Prime Minister in the UK, where I'm speaking from today. So Nick, welcome to you. We're going to be talking about defending the future of the open internet, specifically internet fragmentation, data regulation, digital protectionism. So let's kick off with some of that jargon to start with. What do we mean when we talk about internet fragmentation, and why is it such an existential threat?
Yeah, and by the way, thanks for the introduction. You made it sound as if I was still Deputy Prime Minister, but those days are long behind me, for better or for worse. Look, on internet fragmentation, I think maybe a good way to sort of get the ball rolling and sort of describe what's going on is that in many ways, the internet that we all take for granted, the open, borderless, seamless internet is almost the sort of epitome of the age of globalization. And within that, I guess, big social media platforms like Facebook are really the sort of poster child of globalization, where millions, billions of people can share content, videos, messages, in an instant, in a heartbeat, across borders, where geography is absolutely no impediment whatsoever. And that's, of course, built on top of a global data infrastructure in which sort of data whistles every millisecond at vast speeds and huge volumes around the world. And that's sort of the infrastructure, if you like, of the internet that we've taken for granted. Now, I think a number of big things have happened. Firstly, this might be a melodramatic thing to say, but the global internet actually doesn't exist globally anymore, because you actually have a completely different paradigm. You have a completely different kind of internet, the Chinese internet, based on, in a sense, walling off the internet within China from the rest of the internet, heavy surveillance within that. And I think the other thing that's happened, the other big thing that's happened, is that even though globalization has moved apace technologically and economically, politics is deglobalizing. You see everywhere a rise in nationalism, protectionism, and just generally and often entirely legitimate instinct for governments and regulators to want to try and control what they can within their own borders. And that's where this collision is now really starting to take shape. And there are now, if you look in places as diverse as new draft legislation in India, through to a very complex, highly important legal dispute between the EU and the US, in which the European Union Court of Justice has ruled on numerous occasions that the way in which the US intelligence services access data is incompatible with EU data protection law. All of those factors could lead to what is in the jargon, in effect, called data localization, where governments and authorities start insisting that instead of having an open global infrastructure, that they want data, if you like, hoarded and kept within their own jurisdiction. If that continues apace, I think it's not too extreme to say that the internet as we know it will flounder, because the very point of the global internet is that it is global. And if administrations either fail to arrange new data flow agreements across the Atlantic between the EU and the US, they're negotiating at the moment, I hope they succeed, or if they legislate, as they are in India and other places, to sort of divide up the cake, then in effect the global internet as we know it just won't exist. And that, by the way, just what's the practical effect of that? It stretches on everything from medical research to payroll data to the banking and financial system. All thousands upon thousands of companies in Europe and America, for instance, rely on a legal instrument called the standard contract clauses to exchange data across the Atlantic every millisecond of the day. That legal instrument might no longer be valid going forward, and that would really put a huge question mark on the whole transatlantic data economy.
Can I just clarify then that are you pro-regulation, or does it just depend on the type of regulation and who's doing it?
Well, clearly the internet needs regulation, like any new technology, which offers great benefits but also has downsides. The eruption of social media and communication technology over the last 10, 20 years has led to, in a sense, both great benefits, but also considerable disruption. And there's always a time lag between the advent of new technology and the invention and application of new norms and laws. It was a long time before there were proper laws on seatbelts in cars, after cars were invented. And I think we're going through the same transition. This is a somewhat different issue, which is especially if the big open, what I'd call techno-democracies of the world, the US, the EU, India, and in my job, overseeing how a global company like Facebook operates around the world and the policies that apply to that. These are, in a sense, the three big planets which have their own kind of force field and have such a huge effect on how the internet will be governed in the future. If those three techno-democracies basically turn inwards and turn their back on the open trade flows, which I think have brought huge, immense economic, let alone social and cultural benefits, that would really unpick everything that we rely on every day. I mean, so much of what we take for granted is actually based at the back end, in the boiler room, if I can put it like that, on seamless data flows from one country to another.
You talked a lot then about the public sector, governments and democracies in particular, and what they should be doing, perhaps are doing in some cases as well. But what about the private sector, and where a company like, of course, Facebook controls a significant portion of the industry? What will you be doing, or what are you doing right now to defend the future of the open internet?
Well, we have to first, explain that, Facebook, for instance, I don't know, if you sitting in Southwest London want to send a family picture to a cousin in Hong Kong who wants to share it with a friend in Argentina who wants to share it with a niece in Oklahoma, that is all, that's all built on a huge amount of physical infrastructure, data centers, cabling, all around the world, and is based on the premise that your data, as you share it, that's your choice, and that it's not for governments to say where it should be, parked and hoarded, and that you need, control over that. So I think the responsibility for companies like Facebook, and of course, it's controversial stuff. There are always controversies, quite rightly and quite understandably, swirling around companies like Facebook, because you've got so much of humanity, 3 billion people communicating the good, the bad, and the ugly, as and when they want on our platforms. And there's of course, there's a raging debate about how much is that the responsibility of the user, how much is that the responsibility of regulators and governments, and how much is that the responsibility of the platforms. Clearly, in that, the platforms have a heavy responsibility, but we can't discharge that responsibility on our own. We have to do that hand in glove with regulators. We have to operate within democratically agreed norms and standards. And so we do work a lot with regulators and lawmakers as they're passing new legislation, whether it's new legislation in India, the one I referred to earlier, or whether it's the big jumbo laws being passed in the EU on the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act. And one of the things we do, we're a private company, it's not for us to determine what that legislation should be, but we can, I hope, give mature and responsible and helpful advice on what it actually means in practice. Because, I was a legislator for close to 20 years, both in Europe and the UK. And one thing I can tell you about legislation is there are always unintended consequences. It never works out quite as the blueprint suggests. And that's especially true when you're dealing with very fluid technologies, which are sometimes quite difficult to understand for the non-specialist.
And I want to ask you, I'll ask you later on perhaps about the fact that you've worn both hats on both sides, and which one's perhaps a more suitable fit for you as well when looking at this topic. But you mentioned there about reports and scandals and rumors and all the rest of it that swirl around companies like Facebook, given your size and your power and dominance within the sector as well. And I have to ask you about this recent reporting in the Wall Street Journal, claiming that Facebook knows that its platforms, notably Instagram, is negatively impacting the well-being of teenage girls, for example. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think, in a sense, it's of course right that a big company like Facebook, and I suspect many of the big companies that are represented at this event do the same, which is that you're constantly researching the way in which your products work or your services work, how people interact with them, what they feel. I mean, in a sense, what would be shocking is if we didn't do that research. But, you know, like all the big corporates at this event who do that research, whether it's in banking or retail or agribusiness or law, you know, we're companies, we're not universities, and this research is done on a non-stop basis. You have thousands of pieces of internal research. You have hundreds of people working on this. You have individual researchers doing their own projects, and so I suppose the only thing I hope I can reasonably say is that plucking out one study in one moment in time, and I think some of these studies cited by the Wall Street Journal are actually a couple of years old, and then sort of declaring that that has to be the problem, and therefore why has the answer not been tailored exactly to that piece of research, misses the fact, of course, that we look at this research in the round all the time and make changes constantly, including on Instagram. We made numerous changes on Instagram to try and make sure that young people who use Instagram use it as safely as possible. I think the one research paper that was internal research paper that was leaked to the Wall Street Journal refers to, I think, girls who already feel concerned about themselves, might have issues around body image and so on. That a number, I think it's a minority of them, but nonetheless a significant number of them surveyed when asked. So it was a sort of survey, said that they felt worse, not all the time, but at times when they would then use Instagram. And in a sense, that's I think for anyone who has teenage children, that I think that would resonate. But of course, it also has to do with the prior sentiment of the individuals who answered that survey. So I would hate anyone to think that one piece of research either is a picture on all the research we do. I think many academics who study this and who we partner with say that there are good uses of social media, the bad uses of social media. Our responsibility is to try and amplify the good and minimize the bad, including by giving young people far greater control where we can over their own experience. And we will continue to do so. However, sort of breathlessly sometimes these individual internal pieces of research are portrayed in the press.
I mean, you've said that obviously there's research ongoing, all the time within Facebook as well. I mean, with that, what particulars have you managed to pull out from that research that have then changed perhaps the apparatus, the infrastructure of say, Instagram, so that in defense of the future of the open internet, we're also making sure that we're protecting society's most vulnerable?
Well, I mean, we employ 40,000 people now to keep people safe on Facebook. We have invested, I think, since 2016, $13 billion in really sort of industry-leading technology to bear down on hate speech. I mean, hate speech, for instance, I read almost daily that Facebook is awash with hate speech, but the statistics, in as much as people, I hope, continue to believe in the importance of credible data, show that the prevalence of hate speech, in other words, the rate of how often you'd see hate speech in terms of the total content on your news feed as you're scrolling on your feed on your phone on Facebook, is about 0.05%. And look, I wish it was 0%. It is never going to be 0%. We're not going to be able to eliminate hate speech, because remember, hate speech, or what is called hate speech, which is often a really unpleasant speech, is legal speech. Now, we have our own rules. We bear down on that. I think it's a good example where AI technology has now identified the vast majority of hate speech before it's reported to us. We block billions of fake accounts on an ongoing basis before they actually are seen by anybody. Again, that's done through machine learning, AI technology. So I do think we've made huge investments. I don't think we're ever going to completely expunge the bad from social media, but I believe, having worked here for 3 years, that we are making very, very sincere, no doubt imperfect efforts at constantly enhancing user control, protecting vulnerable people from seeing content that is really not great, and crucially, removing and blocking content from our platforms that simply don't belong on our services.
Are you pleased that you've made the move from public to private, and what have been the big sort of like lessons that you've learned along the way?
Am I pleased? Well, I mean, look, the traditional thing, as you know, Hannah, and for the Brits on this call would know, the traditional thing for someone in my position who sort of got sort of near or close to the top of the tree in politics is you end up just languishing on the red benches in the House of Lords and sort of pontificating from the sidelines. I never wanted to do that. So yes, I'm absolutely delighted that I've been able to do this completely different job. It's very, very different. The velocity and variety of it certainly reminds me of government, and I'm enjoying it hugely.
And who then, given the fact that you have worn both hats in government and also as a senior corporate executive, who do you think is then best placed to defend the future of the open internet? Is it government or is it the likes of Facebook?
I do think in the end, governments in, particularly Europe and America, they really just need to decide, are they going to defend the open internet, which is under, as I say, real threat from quite different approaches to the internet, much more sort of semi-authoritarian approaches to the internet. Look at the developments on the internet in Russia, in Turkey, in Vietnam and China. That is the practice that is going to expand unless, I think, particularly America, Europe and India can really band together and defend the basic principles of an open, free internet. And look, there are lots, as we've seen in the news, there are lots of tensions at the moment between Europe, between the EU and the US. I hope this is one subject where they can really start making progress.
Okay, well, that is all we have time for in this particular discussion. I've loved chatting to you, Nick. That is the summation of our Defending the Future of the Open Internet talk for Concordia. And we hand back now to the rest of the summit for the rest of the day's events. So Nick Clegg, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.